Good evening, everyone. My name is Thane Rosenbaum. I'm the creative director of the Forum on Life, Culture, and Society at Truro University. We call ourselves FOLCS, and welcome to the FOLCS Conversations on Essential Cinema series. It is a new series that we've had for the last several years, and it's wildly popular. Tonight's film, the cult classic 1971 Hal Ashby directed film, Harold and Maude, and the person who is our special guest to discuss it is the luminous Gabrielle Anwar. Gabrielle, say hello to everybody.
Hey there, hello.
You know Gabrielle, she's got at least 50 film and TV credits to her name. More recently, you can remember her as the co-star of the television spy series Burn Notice. She was wonderful in Showtime's The Tudors, where she played King Henry VIII's sister, who, if I recall, was married to a duke who eventually became Superman. It's a nice little,
How does that work?
It doesn't really, it's not the kind of thing most people say about the Tudors, but I'd like to say that my friend Gabrielle was married in a TV show to Superman. A younger Henry Cavill. And of course, she is very well known, extremely well known, maybe too well known for the most famous tango ever in film cinematic history. It's from The Scent of a Woman. And when they say it takes two to tango, Gabrielle, I'd like to tell people that Al Pacino may not have won the award for Best Actor if you not had danced with him that night in that movie.
That's very generous of you.
I'm going to mention it to Al. I'm going to say, don't forget, that would not have happened without that tango. So yes. And actually, it's interesting because the tango is iconic. I'm sure you'd ever remember we had once Mandy Patinkin, and he said he can't go through an airport without somebody saying to him that he should say the Inigo Montoya line from The Princess Bride. My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die.
Yes, yes.
And I bet you have something similar with the tango.
Yeah, which is getting harder to implement the older I get. The hips just aren't doing what they used to do back in the day.
No, come on. People are actually saying, can you dance a little for us?
Oh, you would be surprised. And then they become the pas de deux partner.
Oh my God, that's right. You know what? That would be a great little anecdote. I danced with the partner in Scent of a Woman, and she spun me around the floor. It actually is so iconic. I was thinking about how, it's so well known. It's like lines in a movie like Hill of Beans in Casablanca, or I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore in Network. Everyone knows the Scent of a Woman tango scene. If you are watching us live on YouTube, we love that. Welcome again. Don't forget to go to folks.org and sign up for our email list so you'll get notice of our future events and past events, and notice of this actual recording of tonight's event, where that'll be found both on YouTube and on our website. If you have a question about the film, or for Gabrielle in particular, feel free to leave it in the Q&A box, and hopefully we'll get some time to discuss it. Gabrielle, welcome. Thank you. I gave you an out. I said, get Conversations on Essential Cinema, which is, we've had all these really special guests from Sharon Stone to Matthew Modine to William Fichtner and Elizabeth Holtzman and Mark Feuerstein. And recently we had Jeremy Schaap for the film Chariots of Fire. I usually say to the guests, do you have a film? And then I say, when they hesitate, I say, I have some suggestions. So you rejected all of mine. First of all, I without any sense of cleverness, I came up with all the Henry VIII movies I could think of.
Yes, that was impressive. That was very impressive.
Yeah, but you didn't like any of them. I even found ones that I even slipped in A Lion in Winter, which is really Henry II. but I said, I like that movie. I like Peter O'Toole.
Screw the Henrys.
Yeah, it's still the Tudor family. And then I thought Last Tango in Paris. But then I thought your husband would object. It's just too racy, even for folks. So tell us why you chose this cult classic, Harold and Maude.
Well, I first saw this in the 70s. I was a child, I think I was sort of tweening. I was like sort of between a child and a teen. And
So obviously your parents saw this as a movie worth taking you to.
yes,
Yeah, I'm not just, I think it's
my
an
parents-
interesting choice.
no, my parents were both artists and terribly bohemian, and so the arts were an open door for me, regardless of how controversial it may have been. Much more controversial now, obviously, with this woke status. However,
I love the way you put that. Woke status.
woke status. I'll leave it at that. But I fell in love with Ruth Gordon. I fell in love with Maude. I just wanted to be her, and I hope to eventually become her. But she was just, there's so much freedom and liberty in her character, and I thought she did such an extraordinary job. Even the way she moved, the way she walked was a seduction, and it was just so charismatic to me at that age, and I felt so bad for Bud Cort, because I did have bouts of depression when I hit puberty, and I remember thinking, God, you know, I get it. I get the darkness, and I would love to have that avenue into the light. And just how he shifted when she became part of his life, it was just incredibly moving to me, and still is. You know, I think the movie's aged really well.
Yeah, you saw it recently again, right?
Yes, I did last night.
Wow. Well, that raises an interesting question about your parents and Northern England, where I think you grew up, or mid England. I won't
Southern, actually in the South.
The South, right, exactly, right. I'm trying to remember where that is. I know where you live. I'm not giving away your childhood address, but I'm trying to remember where that is on the map. So that raises an interesting question, because you saw it as a European girl, and your parents, who were Europeans, brought their daughter to see this film. This film was an absolute bomb in the United States when it first opened. People don't realize 1971, it got horrible reviews. Roger Ebert famously said, I said something like, it's like watching an orphanage burn down, right? That is just the worst thing you could say.
Ooh,
Vincent
that's
Canby.
harsh. That is harsh.
Like watching an orphanage burn down. Vincent Canby in the New York Times trashed it. People didn't see it. They had to change the poster to give it less of an image of an elderly woman and a boy. It literally took 10 years for the movie to recoup its financing, and it was made cheaply. So it should have been recouped much sooner, and remained an art house cult classic. And I'm wondering a couple things. First of all, what is it that you think makes a cult classic as opposed to a classic? All of the conversations on essential cinema are classic films, but they're not cult classics. And secondly, I wonder whether, you know, that I had heard that the Europeans did not have the same reaction to the movie when it first opened in Europe. So I don't know what year you saw it, probably around 1973, 1974. My guess is when you saw it, because it opened in 71.
I saw it much later. I was
It was released again in 78. Just to give you a sense of how strange the history of this movie, it was released 4 times. They released it in 78 again. Wow. So you might have seen it. They just never gave up on it. And apparently in the United States, it was such a favorite on college campuses. And it used to play as the midnight show in art houses all throughout the United States.
Wow,
and college,
that's amazing.
Yeah, college students and art house fans that would go to midnight showings kept this thing alive, and it forced Paramount to keep re-releasing it later. But in Europe, the reviews were more positive, and people didn't run away from it. And I wonder whether you would speak as a European to say maybe Americans are more hung up on death. Maybe we just can't handle sexuality.
I think, from my perspective, having been here now longer than I lived in England, I've become a US citizen, and I raised my children here, but I do think that the US is far more puritanical than Europe, for sure, in so many avenues. And I remember when I was a child, my parents had coffee table books of nudes, and they were children. And I remember coming to the States, and the book had been banned for decades. And I grew up looking at that art, and it was stunning and beautiful. And there was nothing perverse about it. It was done very tastefully. It wasn't lascivious. And I think the cinema is in the same space as that photography book.
And so do you think so? Part of it is the sexuality, the obvious, and not just the obvious sexuality, but the taboo of this sexual relationship. It's bad enough that there's sex, because the 70s had sex in films, but this broke different kinds of barriers. This is like The Graduate on crack, right?
Yes.
Right,
yes,
because The Graduate, the woman is in her 40s.
Right, exactly.
This
but
woman
it shatters, right, it shatters ageism in such a beautiful way. It really does. It makes you look at relationships in such a different light. For me, it did then, and my father was quite a bit younger than my mother. I'm sorry, forgive me, I'm getting all sorts of texts, but my father was quite a bit younger than my mother. So there was an ageist element in their marriage that I wasn't even aware of until I was much older. But I was very accepting of Harold and Maude and their love story.
And also what you said, there's something about not just the sexuality, but the human body itself. There's that early scene where she's technically posing for an ice sculptor, right? And Harold is shocked to see this elderly woman naked, and she's just being, sculpted by an artist.
Yeah,
and it just seems
stunning. It gives me hope.
And then, of course, death. We don't have, as Americans, a problem with slasher movies, but we do have a problem with death. We like the Hollywood movie. The convention is life-affirming happy endings. We like it. Guy gets girl at the end. Good guy wins over bad guy at the end. Good guys ride off in the sunset at the end. This movie has a very strange sunset scene. When you say riding off in the sunset, to do what? Right? Yeah. To do what, for God's sakes? And also, it's like what was shattering about Hollywood when they made Love Story, which was roughly a year before, because Love Story ended so sad, and Americans aren't used to a young actress like Ali McGraw dying of leukemia. That's not an American movie. That's a Swedish movie. And so I think it's interesting, right? That it's not just the sexual, it might also be death, that this movie is obsessed with funerals and death and blood, and not in a Halloween way, in a regular way. It forces you to confront it in a way. Again, Swedish movies like Ingmar Bergman films, Seventh Seal, Wild Strawberries, they're all about death. We don't do that well here.
No, and yet Harold is liberated at the end after the death. I think he really does find life eventually because of her passing.
So while we're there, since you opened that door, let's talk about that. Do you think it's a surprising ending? Do you think it's an ambivalent ending? We see the character staging death scenes the whole movie. That's all he does. And he's winking at the audience the entire time. So we have no reason to believe that it won't be fake. At the same time, we've never seen him as emotional as he was in the emergency room, right? So there's some emotional turmoil, conflict there. And I'm wondering whether you think that's the right ending.
I thought it was perfect. I really did. I thought it was, it was very hard to watch Maude pass and take those pills, knowing that she was in love. And obviously that he was in love, but I thought that she'd made this commitment that when she turned 80, she was a goner, and I just thought that he embraced life with his banjo on that hill, on that cliff edge, and I just thought it was perfect. It was so perfect.
But let me ask you this. I agree. I like that ending, but the ending, it is a capstone to another ending, which is the ending of Maude taking her own life, right? So yes, there is the life-affirming ending of Harold finally, embracing life. But, we take for granted that Maude says, I decided I would kill myself on my birthday when I turned 80. Instead of the audience saying, what? Why? Why? This whole movie, you've been convincing us that we should live free. And you can steal cars. You're very agile. Why? We don't.
Well, there is a little hint. There's a tiny little line earlier on in the film where she says, my body isn't what it once was. And she says, I do these morning breaths, and she starts to do them and she gets breathless. And she says to him, my body isn't what it once was. And I think that's the key. I think she doesn't want to deteriorate further into an elderly situation where she can't embrace life any further.
See, that's interesting. I hadn't considered that. You're saying that what she represents is truly living life to its fullest.
Yes.
And that means that one must have the capacity to do that. And when not, then suicide becomes an option.
Right. Well, I mean, she basically breathed life into Harold and actually sacrificed her own for him.
So do you actually think that that's a permissible, that is a realistic also reading of the film, that it's like she can say goodbye because she knows that she's done a deed, it's like she gave life. It's like she's a kidney donor, right?
Yes. She says to Harold when she's in the gurney, she says, go love again, go love. And she's taught him what that looks like because his mother wasn't capable.
Right. So you're saying that those final words are when she would said, they're not just nifty dialogue. It's actually, prophecy, right? She's saying, I have given you the tools to actually do the thing you didn't know how to do.
Yes.
And you actually don't need, life. I'm sorry, go ahead.
And she gave her life. She sacrificed her life for him.
But the question is, but why, right? But why, why, I was always puzzled, and I find it as for me, a lot of conflict about the ending, especially since the studio, again, they didn't know what to make of the movie. By the way, Gabrielle, the movie at art houses, at this festivals, standing ovations. So the studio didn't know that the movie was a flop. It thought they had a winner. Now, remember, 1971 was The French Connection, Fiddler on the Roof. They had a lot of competition that year, but they actually thought they had an Oscar contender. It's so interesting how that a studio misjudged it, right? And then they don't know what to do.
Yes. Well, I thought the film was Oscar worthy. I think that there was a faux pas there with the Academy, but that's nothing new.
But it might be for what you said before, that it was boundary breaking in a way that was un-American.
Very un-American. Right? Absolutely. Yes, it was.
Everything about it. And guess what? The movie itself was un-American, meaning it was counterculture, anti-establishment, yes. Anti-military,
yes,
anti-wealth, anti-police.
Yes, it was. It was fabulous.
There's even a picture of Richard Nixon on the wall.
Yes, yes.
It was a countercultural film, and by the way, it's filmed in San Francisco.
Yeah,
which is no accident, right? It's a film about the anti-establishment, and of course, it should be in San Francisco, and he should drive a hearse. So I wonder whether I find the whole thing puzzling because it should have done better. Now, maybe it makes sense that the film did well on college campuses, but it was like, the Graduate had already been out a year or two. It was almost like maybe the end of the flower power. Like, I don't know. No one really knows the reason for why
I think it was ahead of its time. I really do. I think it was the wrong era for something of that depth and intensity. I just don't think it was that we were ready for something like that at that time, certainly in the States.
Right. Well, again, that explains why your parents wouldn't think twice about taking their daughter. And, by the way, I'm just sort of curious. Normally don't ask a question like this. Did you discuss this with your parents?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. They too loved the film.
Is that right? They loved it.
Yes.
It's a film that in many ways it's hard to not like, right? Because there are the characters are likable,
They're
even
wonderful.
right?
Yes.
You're rooting for them, right? There's a lot of sympathy for both of them. And so that it's strange that is it because of the nudity? Is it because of the sex scene, that is so revolting to some people? How could she have sex with a boy, essentially, a 19-year-old? By the way, cult films, I was just reminded, so the movie eventually is now listed in the National Film Registry, which means that the Library of Congress has already designated this as a film of major historical and cultural importance. And that's not given too often. And in fact, another film that this happened with, a film that we had earlier in Conversations on Essential Cinema, 12 Angry Men, had a very similar trajectory. Nobody really saw it in the movie theater. They made it for $350,000. That's what they made the whole thing for. As you know, it was shot in one room. It was an easy film to shoot. It was nominated for some awards, but it was discovered later. We've had a great history here at FOLCS with it. We showed it for Conversations on Essential Cinema with Matthew Modine, who, by the way, on camera mentioned that this law film was so important to him that he wanted to play Atticus Finch on Broadway. This was right when the pandemic started. Broadway was shut down. So this is a great little FOLCS anecdote, Gabrielle, because he talked about that. He wanted to play, to replace Jeff Daniels.
Who doesn't want to play Atticus Finch?
Exactly.
I want to play Atticus Finch.
And guess what? Your home country, England, Matthew Modine just opened as Atticus Finch in the West End.
That's fantastic.
He mentioned it on our.
Good for him.
Yeah, he mentioned it on our stage. But I think about that film too, because it also took years for people to have the patience for, or to be open about. Let's go back to the suicide. I want to talk a little about this because it does seem to suggest, on the one hand, is it a misdirection that we're supposed to not focus on Maude's suicide because we're rooting for Harold, because we're so happy he's playing the banjo and dancing? Is that a filmic manipulation by Ashby to say this will take the sting away?
No, I don't think so. I think she died for a cause. It's the same as somebody dying for their religious beliefs or their country. She died for a cause. It was ideological.
Now, what about the something that needs to be explained? The film really doesn't do it. We'll talk about it shortly. There might be some possible explanations, but the film is about a life-affirming 79-year-old woman who could not be more larger than life. So large in life that little Gabrielle Anwar in the UK decided she wanted to be her, right? That's how full of life she was. You want to be her. And she takes us through this. She lives in an abandoned train car. She sees differences in daisies, makes distinctions even within the same species of a flower. Why in the hell is she committing suicide? The one character who most embodies the zest for life, the idea that life is always worth living, the idea that one should always take chances in life and risks. You steal a car, right? It just, to me, is inexplicable. And I wonder, and Harold, who is sort of morose and inconsolable, maybe she does fix him, so to speak, but at a consequence that doesn't make sense given who she is. And you say that, yes, she says, well, maybe my body is giving out on me, but there's not much evidence of that in the movie.
Well, she feels it. I do think that she doesn't believe in attachments, and she's just become one to Harold. And I think that's a huge part of her decision to end her life while she's still vibrant and vivacious.
If I remember, I could be wrong. You'll remind me because you saw it just last night. I think at some point he says to her, Maude, I love you.
Yes.
But I don't think she says to him, I love you.
She does. He makes her a little pin at the arcade and has it inscribed with Harold loves Maude, and he hands it to her and she says, and Maude loves Harold. And then
I'm sorry, I missed that.
She flings it into the water, and because she doesn't want to be attached, and she says, now I'll know exactly where it is.
And the reason I raised that question because, clearly this is the first time that Harold is feeling this.
Yes.
Right. So for him, this is very raw. And she is 79. And she tells us in the film at some point that she was in love with a military officer in Austria. And then she ended up with a doctor. And that's the only time she's tearful in the entire film. So we believe that this is a woman who believed in free love and experimented with free love, right? I think that that's something interesting about the sex, right? That she could be thinking, Harold, I'm your first experience. You don't know.
I'm sure she's thinking that. I'm sure
you don't know anything.
Super proud. Yes. She's just taught him like the meaning of life.
Right. You could not have come to me more inexperienced, right? There's like nothing you know how to do other than paint a car the color of a hearse. You haven't lived, and I'm trying to teach you how to do it. And I just think I was wondering whether that, in an age of free love, and when you said the words lack of commitment, that maybe she might not have ever said, I love you, because she knows that love itself is ephemeral. It's right that she knows, that there's a limit to what that actually means.
Yes. And she perhaps hasn't been in love for 50 years.
That's right. That's right. So she knows not to misread it, right? She knows not to overvalue it, to know what it is, and to somehow, neutralize his feelings. So let's talk about another explanation, because I do think that there is, let's go back to the ending again, because I do think that given the number of times that he stages his death, and given, when we think of, what was a film with, she's been a guest on FOLCS, Susan Sarandon, also the something and something, the two women's name.
Thelma and Louise.
Thelma and Louise, right? This has a Thelma and Louise ending, right? And I would say that you could make the argument that this film really should have had a Thelma and Louise ending. And I'll tell you why, because I know what you're saying and I like what you're saying, but I'm thinking, how is Harold capable? He is so, at this point, filled with grief and loss, right? And he's never really experienced any of those emotions. She's taught him. So here he is, overwhelmed with loss. And so we would be trained to think, oh, by the way, the film is also anti-psychiatry, right?
Yes.
Right? Because there's a limit. He's fooling his psychiatrist the entire time. That he would go off the cliff to join her. I'm just wondering whether, that Ashby was trying to get us to think that that was what he would do, that after faking so many deaths, he would actually pursue one to join his true love.
But it wouldn't justify what she's taught him if they both went out.
It would devalue the lesson.
He's now using the tools that she gave him in order to embrace life rather than death.
Love that. That's a great answer. Right. Otherwise, it would all have been lost on him.
Yes.
Right. The only thing that made sense to him is that he would miss her, but he didn't learn anything else. Right. that all the life lessons were wasted because in the end, she's not with him and life is not worth living. And she's basically saying, no, life is always worth living. But of course, the irony is the person who teaches the lesson is the person who takes it. Now, I want to now get to a tough part of this discussion. This is the bonus round, because I think that some of the answers to this film can only be understood through the Holocaust. I actually think this is an early Holocaust movie. By the way, our first conversations on Essential Cinema, about 2 or 3 years ago, when we started this series, we started with The Pawnbroker, starring, it was Sidney Lumet's film, and it's Saul Naserman was played by Rod Steiger, who was nominated for an Academy Award, who at that time was married to one of your countrywomen, Claire Bloom, in those days. People don't remember that. Rod Steiger was married to Claire Bloom. That clearly was an in-your-face Holocaust film. But I've done a fair amount of writing about this. For years, I was like, for the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, I was the guy that wrote about Holocaust movies. So I wrote about all of them, Schindler's List and The Pianist and Shine, but mostly for the New York Times, also the Wall Street Journal and the LA Times. So this is, I'm telling you, this is intruding on an area of mine that I find fascinating, that I hadn't really spent any time thinking about before until you picked this movie, because there is a Holocaust dimension, but it is very elliptical. And I think it's intentionally elliptical. We're told by Maude earlier about Vienna, and that's where it brings back tears. We're told that because she has an umbrella and he asks her about the umbrella, and she somehow moves into this anecdote about her loves and Austria. And then he says to her, do you not use the umbrella anymore? Because she says, I used to use the umbrella at protests, for various protests. That's just very interesting, right? She doesn't say for what. We're in San Francisco where everybody was protesting. We know she said she's from Austria, but she doesn't have an accent, right? It seemed, by the way, was it Hal? Somebody didn't want her, which is hard to believe since you loved her so much. They wanted a European accent, actress, because they wanted someone who would appear to have been from Austria. Mm-hmm. Instead, she sounds like she's from Brooklyn. And then, of course, later in the film, there is a glimpse of a tattooed number on her wrist.
And it really is a glimpse. The shot is held for probably 2 seconds, if not less.
And then I think the camera goes to Harold to show that he saw it, right? So it's not just the audience, it's Harold's vision that we see, but it's quick. But we don't see in that, you're a pro, Gabrielle, so I don't know what Hal Ashby would have said to you if you were the actor in that situation. I'm just curious, like, what he's supposed to convey? He doesn't seem to convey understanding. It's quick. He doesn't ask her, what the hell is that? Why do you have a number on your arm? Can you tell me about it? It seems weird to me that maybe it's because he knew what it meant. But let me just say, in 1971, I must tell the audience if they don't know, the word Holocaust survivor wasn't even in use. I know this is going to blow people. They were referred to as European refugees. Holocaust survivor was not in use until many years later, early 90s, that it became a conventional phrase. Not really. It took Schindler's List and the commemoration, the opening of the Holocaust Museum in 92 and 93. It took those, and then there was a whole spate of documentaries and movies. But, people misread the Diary of Anne Frank. The diary was redacted by her father, in my view, a criminal act, what Otto Frank did, redacted the diary, universalized it, took the words Jewish out. The movie never says the word Jews. it's not about Jews. It's about man's inhumanity in man. That's what Whoopi Goldberg wants us to think, that it's really about that. It has nothing to do with Jews. It's about man's inhumanity to man. And so people don't know this, that this is in 1971, Gabrielle, the television show, the miniseries, The Holocaust, was 7 years away.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah, nobody really would know. It would not have been obvious what that was.
Yeah, no, well, for me, the very quick depiction of the tattoo is speaking volumes, because it's saying this is why she embraces her life the way she does. So she's a survivor.
Right, exactly. And yet she commits suicide.
Yes.
No matter how many times I ask you, you're not troubled by this.
No, not in the least.
Yeah.
I know you are, obviously.
I am very
troubled. I'm so sorry that you're so troubled.
Well, I'm going to complicate this for you a little. I'm going to complicate this a little for you. Holocaust survivors, as percentage of the population, never commit suicide. As a percentage of the population, have a very low suicide rate, except for one group of Holocaust survivors. You don't want to know who they are, Gabrielle?
Yes, I
Artists.
Do.
The writers, in fact, I wrote a novel about this idea. The Golems of Gotham is about this idea. It's a mystery. It's a post-Holocaust mystery. Primo Levi, Jerzy Kosinski. By the way, Jerzy Kosinski is the author of Being There. That movie was also shot by Hal Ashby.
Yes.
The director
he's a hero. He's a hero. I actually got to do a film with him.
Really? Which film was that?
It was a pilot. It wasn't a film. It was a pilot called Jake's Journey. It was never picked up, but I got to work with a hero.
Oh my God. That is a great anecdote. Wow. Yeah. I mean, I think that's interesting also that Ashby was kicking around this a lot. Even the misanthropic characters, like the Being There character and with the Peter Sellers character. But the Primo Levi, your Jerzy Kosinski, who wrote Being There, Tadeusz Borowski, Paul Celan, the German poet, it'll come to me some more, Piotr Ravish, the Parisian novelist, and then one more, the Belgian writer. They all killed themselves. Survivors never did, except for the writers, the artists. And let me tell you something, another FOLCS anecdote. We had Elie Wiesel one night with John Turturro. It was a great night. John Turturro played Primo Levi in a movie called The Truce. It was an Italian movie where John Turturro played Primo Levi, and the movie takes place immediately after the liberation of Auschwitz. And it was really about his experience of trying to get back to Italy. That's what the movie's about, his journey back. And Primo Levi had committed suicide. By the way, I must tell you, and that's why you'll find this interesting, the Italians refused to accept the fact that he killed himself. They won't believe it. You ask an Italian, they'll say, Primo Levi fell down the stairs. He didn't kill himself. They won't accept it. Why? He was like Maude. All his writings were life-affirming, and they wouldn't accept a guy who believed in life so much, ultimately taking his life. And I will just share with the audience and with you that was a really great, you could probably watch the clip on our website, when John Turturro stepped in, because I knew John feels the same way, that Primo Levi didn't kill himself, and refused to accept it. And Elie Wiesel talked him down and literally said to John, you should not be so scared of this. He said, sometimes suicide is the right thing. That's what yeah. Elie Wiesel said, sometimes you should not judge it. You should not feel sorry for it. You should not feel like it was a human failure. Like the Italians feel like they failed him in some way. And it was an interesting moment on our stage. And that's why I wanted to tell you this, to see if it changes your thinking a little.
No, it makes me more committed to the fact that she chose her own destiny. The Nazis didn't kill her. Nobody killed her. It was her own independence and her own choice. It was her own choosing that destroyed her. Nobody else destroyed her.
So to you, it's like the umbrella. It's another protest,
Yes.
right? That
Yes.
the act of taking her life, right, on her terms, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I like that. I think that that's, it's complicated. I also thought you might bite on the idea that it's you could ask yourself, well, why did all the artists kill themselves? And you could say that they looked at what happened to them too closely, that they obsessed over it, that they spent too much time, contemplating the unimaginable. And that other survivors actually just went about their business of attending PTA meetings and, and showing up to Little League games.
Right.
And the artist doesn't. The
Right.
artist stays in their head. And I wondered whether you thought, to me, there's just something about the fact that it's her birthday that is something clearly symbolic, something she intends to do. And I think, and I have to say, the reviews did not spend much time talking about the Holocaust for the reason I just said. No one knew what to say about it. And yet you're actually saying it actually makes you think, it deepens your view that that's why she does kill herself.
Yes.
So the other thought I'd talk about is about Holocaust survivors in films. Very unusual, this portrait. If that's the way we understand it. I wrote about this once for the New York Times, actually, that we like our Holocaust survivors in movies to be crazy. The Man in the Glass Booth, Shine, right? The movie Shine, The Pawnbroker. It's as if that's the only way we accept them. And this movie is not that. She's not crazy. There's something about this that is, almost, like an act of defiance.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that it's not like we're seeing somebody who was driven mad by the Nazis, but rather somebody who, was determined to live because of the Nazis on her own terms. What about this idea? I going back to this again, political prisoner. That's an odd thing too, don't you think?
Mm-hmm.
Jews were not political prisoners. They weren't imprisoned because she protested. It's just interesting. The glimpse is an interesting glimpse, but it's a confusing and very elliptical glimpse. Because again, I was reading something where someone said that in the first 10 minutes, it was obvious that she was a Jew, and thinking, really, why is that obvious? Like, what is it, that the movie itself, makes it obvious? It's certainly not obvious that she's a Holocaust survivor.
No.
Right? Like that I think is a twist. But it's the kind of twist that I think we get out of Anne Frank, which is that we're not learning a lot. We're just being told something. And then we have to live with a lot of uncertainty. And maybe, by the way, that's what a Holocaust movie should do.
Maybe.
Right?
Yes.
Right? Not provide any answers.
No.
Because it's unimaginable. If it's ineffable, there's no answers. That maybe the best thing is to, by the way, there's a famous moment in The Pawnbroker, which we did on Conversations on Essential Cinema, where Rod Steiger, toward the end of the movie, screams, but nothing comes out. And she has the face of a man screaming, and it's called the silent scream. And then you hear a trumpet played by Quincy Jones, who scored the movie. So it's this wonderful scene where you don't hear him scream, you see him scream, and then you hear sort of the heartache that is replicated through a trumpet.
Wow, there was something similar in Harold and Maude, where when they're in the park and he's doing somersaults and Maude starts to scream with joy, and then Hal Ashby dubbed Tarzan's classic yell in the jungle over the
good one. Yeah, I love that.
And the whole score, of course, was done by Cat Stevens, which is remarkable and beautiful.
Well, what do you think about that? Let me give you a little anecdote that you might like, which I didn't know about. You know who was considered for the role of Harold? Yeah. Elton John.
Oh,
he was very new at the time. This was 1970. He was very unknown in America at the time. But Ashby saw him in concert and thought he would be the right Harold.
Wow.
And he also offered him that if you take the role, we would like for you to do the whole soundtrack.
Oh, really?
So when you say, now, I don't know, you might say, I don't think Elton John was the right soundtrack for this movie. Maybe you'd say Cat Stevens is the right soundtrack. I know one of our board chairs, Jeff Lenoble, thinks that Cat Stevens is exactly the voice for this film.
I agree.
But there was also who else was considered? A young Richard Dreyfuss, who's been a guest of FOLCS twice, was also considered for the role, and someone else that I can't remember right now. And you know, but was it Bud Cort? Is that his name? Doesn't really, you know, I'm not sure where his career took him from here.
I have never seen him in any other production.
Yeah, I know that. I think at some point they were brought back at a Golden Globes, both Ruth Gordon and Bud Cort, to hand out an award together. So there is probably, if anyone's interested on YouTube, I bet you can find something like that. What about the idea of, this goes back to your European background, when you said about ageism. There is something that Hollywood does like, is elderly people that teach us lessons, right? That take young people on a little joyride, right? They like that. We've seen that. I would say even the Karate Kid is that, you know, like that we like that image. The Princess Bride is that, right? Where the older person who we don't want to take too seriously because he's old or she's so old is ultimately the one that takes us on the best ride. And I think that there is something to be said about that. You know, if they hadn't had sex, the audience might have accepted it more.
Oh, for sure, without a doubt. Yes, I mean, she's imparting her wisdom and her joy, but that's the history of the storytellers in the tribe. Before there was film, we would tell stories.
Right, but it's interesting that it would, for so many people, ruin it. That it shows you how hung up Americans are about the human body and sexuality, that you would literally say, no, I think you're right. If they hadn't had sex, people would have been more accepting of the movie. It's just the love affair that people can't accept. If it was just the elderly next door neighbor who sees a broken young man, you know, unloved, unfeeling, you know, untended, you know, and remember, this is a woman, she has that great line where she's feeding the birds, you know, this is like right out of Mary Poppins. And she says something, you'll remember this better than I do. She says something like, the world likes its prisons.
Yes, it's cages.
It's cages, better, not prisons. And I thought that was supposed to foreshadow the death camps.
Right.
Right. Maybe she was foreshadowing, I know a little something about prisons.
Yes.
Yes. You know, and I think it's a great line. The world certainly likes its cages. Yes. By the way, I don't want to get too metaphorical, but you have to admit that they give her a home that's a cattle car, a train, right? That this is a woman that we later see was a concentration camp victim, who no doubt that the one metaphor that everyone knows, smoke and train tracks and cattle cars, that she makes a home inside a cattle car. I think, again, that's why I said it's not obvious, but the images are very powerful. If you take them in, you go, yeah, the Holocaust. She lives in a cattle car. She talks about cages. She frees the birds. Also, what was interesting, right about around there, they switched in the movie, they edit quick cut to him in the psychiatrist's office with the barren white walls. And it looks like,
and he and the psychiatrist wear the same outfit in each scene.
And it looks like a cage.
Yes, it does. Very much so.
Right? It's as if this is not the answer, to human fulfillment, right, or enlightenment, right? Mm-hmm. That, the idea of, remember the anti-establishment counterculture belief, enlightenment would come from sex and, rock and roll and drugs, LSD, not necessarily going to a psychiatrist. It wasn't Sigmund Freud.
Right.
And I do think that there is an interesting contrast that she learns from her and not from the psychotherapist.
Yes.
Many people love, I noticed that many people talk about the daisy scene and the cemetery scene. Remember that scene where she says, "What flower would you be?" And he says, "Daisies." Yes. And he says, "But they all look alike." And she says, "No, they don't."
And then they end up in the cemetery where all the gravestones look alike.
Yeah, very powerful, right? And they pull, the camera pulls back.
Yeah.
And also remember, this is 1971, so the Vietnam War is in full, effect. And the images of grave, headstones, is something that Americans were, especially perfectly lined up.
Hundreds and hundreds.
I wonder, we don't know what Ashby was thinking. On the one hand, she's saying, no, all the daisies are like in a different way. Some are short, some are tall, some are fatter, some are leaning left, some are leaning right. Meanwhile, the camera pulls back and we see the sameness of the graves. Yeah. She teaches us about flowers and the director teaches us about, to be desensitized to life.
Right. And that we are, in fact, when we're at the end of our lives and we're dead and buried, we're the same as the next gravestone beside us and so on and so forth.
Yes. Which, by the way, I think sharpens your argument about.
Thank you.
It sharpens it because it's saying that is not me. I'm not like that when we pulled the camera back. It sharpens that when death comes, it comes on my terms.
On my terms.
Right. It sharpens it a little to say that it's not like she doesn't understand about funerals. That's how she meets Harold at a funeral. By the way, we don't even understand, is that because of the Holocaust? Why? We know why he is, but we don't know why she is. Is it because she comes from a world of mass death? And so that to her, she's comfortable in funerals because she comes from a world of mass death? I don't know.
I think she's celebrating her life by being there.
Even though she's at a place of death.
Well, she's given herself a cutoff point, and it's on her 80th birthday. So until that day, she's going to be very much alive.
I love that. That's great. Love that. If you want to be free, be free. So there's a Cat Stevens song. She plays it a little on her piano. By the way, she gets him to play the banjo. She's saying to him, you must play music. So for people who, this is for parents who, think of it, are music lessons important? Well, Ruth Gordon said, you must learn how to play an instrument. I love that idea because I actually do believe everybody should play an instrument. It's a great line, but is it true?
Yes.
Do you think it's true?
I think it's a choice.
That if you want to be free, one can be.
Yes.
Okay. All right, let's take some questions from the audience and we'll say goodnight to Gabrielle. This was awesome. This was so much fun, Gabrielle. Did you have fun?
I did have fun. Thank
Good.
you.
I wanted you to have fun. Do you know that Harold, I'm asking the question, missing a word, I think. Do you know that Harold's depression and disillusionment is partially due to a generational divide between him and his mom, and speaks to generational divides today, such as between Gen Z and baby boomers? I mean, you have kids. Do you actually think that this picks up on a kind of generational divide that was only then being recognized?
Yes, absolutely. And it's been going on for centuries. It's just only now do we have the verbiage and the tools to deal with that divide.
Because, it does, we talked about this before jokingly about The Graduate, but the movie has a lot in common with The Graduate, right? Because he's clearly not in sync, Benjamin is, got his last name in The Graduate. They're telling him to get into the plastics business. He just graduated college. He doesn't want to be like them. That there is this anti-establishment idea that I don't want to be like my parents. But you're saying that what you're saying is that Harold and Maude is so openly showing you, because we don't really understand, what he explains why he, tries to commit suicide. He gives the story about the police coming to his mother. I don't even understand that scene. Does that mean that she didn't respond when the police told her that her son was killed in a science experiment? That she doesn't?
Yes, she didn't. She just swooned elegantly.
Right, I see.
There was no raw emotion. There was no reaction, in fact.
I see. So you're saying he cries because he recognizes that his own mother can't generate the kind of human emotion. Because the movie opens on that idea, because the audience actually thinks he just committed suicide by hanging himself. Mm-hmm. And his mother walks in and is talking to him about dinner.
Yes.
Right? And so, she knows he's kidding, but we don't. And so it speaks to something like she's sort of closed off from her son. And even the dating, I love the fact, this is before Match.com or something, the dating sites.
Yes.
This is an early example of a computer dating, 1971. I don't even know what that was. But there's something about that that's antiseptic and not alive. She even says something sort of so un-PC. She said the computer weeds out the fat and ugly ones.
Yes.
It's like, it's disgusting, like that she uses it so contemptuously. She speaks of love. And then there's a question, she says, is sexuality too permissive? And she goes, I certainly think so.
Yes.
The sexual revolution.
She's answering his questions from her perspective.
Exactly.
And then he shoots himself.
This comes from Deborah Wayne. Deborah says, love the conversation. Have you thought about the timing regarding dying on one's birthday? Some think dying on one's birthday means life has been completed. I love that, Deborah.
I do too. I love it.
Love that. I can't help but think when in a very different context, Franz Kafka's The Trial, he gets arrested on his birthday and he goes to his death on his birthday. That Deborah may be onto something, that in art, that Kafka had the same idea, that you get arrested and you go to your execution on that day. Yeah. This comes from another anonymous attendee who says, does the new movie draw a comparison between the Holocaust and the massive amount of lives being lost in the Vietnam War? Woof. That's a loaded question.
Yes, I think it does. I mean,
it's trying to generate an anti-Vietnam War message.
Yeah.
By the way, you knew Ashby because he directed you in a pilot, but he was a notorious hippie, right?
Yes, he was.
He was apparently a gigantic pot smoker, and he claimed there were many years he doesn't remember. And he did such a good job of covering, another movie of his that I loved that also covered that generational anti-establishment. I don't know if you remember, he did Coming Home.
Okay.
John Voight, Jane Fonda, and Bruce Dern. Also, that counterculture, the military versus the Vietnam vet who returns and sort of ends up dating a, flower child who is married to. So you think that you think Ashby might have been making a statement about the war?
I think so. I mean, it would make a lot of sense if you want to look into the layers. I mean, you peel that onion back and there's a lot being said.
Right.
That scene in the graveyard is very powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. No. And also, I don't remember this, and then we'll close off our talk. Did that scene happen before the numbered arm or after the numbered arm? Before. Oh, so that deepens it, because now you've got more information. So when you see the numbered arm, right, you now have more information about like why she's there and why she recognizes and why the camera pulls back, right? Why Ashby pulls back. He wants to give us something about mass death. Gabrielle, you're a wonderful friend, an awesome FOLCS guest, and a really smart lady. And we can't wait to see you either on our stage or some other stage or some set as soon as possible.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. What a delight. Thank you, Thane.
Thank you, Gabrielle. Good night. I'm Thane Rosenbaum for FOLCS.